Hey everybody, and welcome back to Virtual Berlin Tours with me, Nick Jackson. You join me today doing the two things that I like doing more than anything else. One of those, and I generally do this elsewhere, but Corona has stopped me, is wandering around looking for archaeological sites. And the other is when I'm at home here in Berlin or elsewhere in Germany, I like to look around the forests for elements of World War II, elements of the Nazi regime, looking for Nazi concrete. And if you look behind me, you can see I'm sitting on a massive chunk of that shrapnel damaged concrete. And this comes from a set of three buildings that the Nazis built after the first bombing raid hit the German capital in August of 1940. And they belong, this concrete chunk, to anti-aircraft towers. In German, Flaktürme. I'll explain what that means slightly later on. But from August of 1940, the Nazis realised that the Nazi capital's defences from air attack were inadequate, and they started to build these massive, great, kind of almost concrete, medieval type castles that would defend Berlin from air raids. They wanted 6, but they only built 3. And on this tour, we're going to visit those 3 sites. Here, West Berlin, the zoo area, where the first of the anti-aircraft tower sets was built. Then in the north, in the French sector after the war, the Humboldtine northern anti-aircraft tower twin set. And then in what becomes the Soviet sector after World War II, in the Friedrichshain Park, we'll go and have a look at the eastern anti-aircraft tower. These things were massive and they were started at the end of 1940, so that'll be the story of our tour today. If you look at the international press, you might have read that yesterday in Germany, in a place called Cottbus, there was a huge unexploded bomb from World War II that had to be defused. And a couple of weeks ago in England, even though it happens there less frequently, in a place called Exeter in southwestern England, there was an unexploded bomb that had to be defused there as well. This legacy of the bombing raids over Berlin during World War II is still alive. In fact, if you factor in East German and Soviet period munitions that are still found in Berlin and outside, bomb disposal bods, they are diffusing over 1,000 tons of unexploded material every year. But our story starts with the first bombing raid after World War II, and it's going to finish with the attempted removal after World War II of all 3 anti-aircraft towers. The towers came as a twin set. You had the actual battle tower with the guns on top of it. I'll explain about that. That lay a few hundred metres behind me, past those trees on the other side of the canal. But they also came, the anti-aircraft towers, with a command tower, the so-called L tower, Leitturm, leading tower in German. And during the preparation, 2 of the people involved, in fact 3, would be Adolf Hitler. He would make the preliminary sketches after the first bombing raid hit Berlin on August the 25th, 1940. 22 British planes make it. They drop a few bombs, those holes in the ground, some of which were in the park just over there, became kind of a tourist attraction. But it was a bit of a shocker for the Berliners because the war was 11 months old. The first year of the war was just about up. It had been kind of a phony war before that, and they'd been assured, the Berliners, that the German capital was too far from southern English or French airfields, and it would never be bombed during World War II. The man, of course, who was to protect Berlin and Germany from air raids would be the chief of the Luftwaffe, a Mr. Hermann Goering. And after that first raid, he's reported to have made the statement, which was, if one more bomb falls on Berlin or Germany, you can change my name to Meyer. So on the one hand, he's saying, my Luftwaffe Air Force will never let the bombers through. Meyer was a common German name. Now, Berlin will be hit more times than any other German city. Over 320 bombing raids would take place during World War II. And the siren that would sound from last week in August 1940, nearly every day until the 20th of September, the Berliners started to nickname that siren Meyer's Bugle or Meyer's Trumpet. Either way, September the 20th, just under a month after the first bombing raid, a meeting took place between Hitler, his general building inspector, a man called Albert Speer, the famous architect, and a guy called Fritz Todt. Now, Fritz Todt would be the armaments and productions minister. He'd be responsible for all the major building programs that the Nazis had instituted. And in fact, when his plane fell out of the sky in 1943 at the Wolf's Lair in eastern Poland, Speer would take his job. But Fritz Todt and Speer, they start to discuss how we're going to defend Berlin and other German cities from air attack. Hitler makes a sketch and they decide on these huge concrete towers. They put them in the parks because the towers and their turrets had to be higher than the trees and the surrounding buildings to give them a 360-degree firing range. The towers were then sketched out by Hitler, and Fritz Todt decides on an architect called Professor Friedrich Tams. He'd been working for the Todt organization, designing bridges for the new Autobahn complexes that the Nazis were constructing, and Fritz Tams would put together these various versions of the towers that would eventually be built, first in Berlin, the Mark I versions, then later, where they still stand, in Vienna and also in Hamburg. But we're going to think about the anti-aircraft towers in Berlin, and we're going to start with the tower at Zoo. So this belongs to the command tower. It'll be on top of this, as I'll explain later. You have the radar systems and the communications with the tower itself, giving them information, height, speed, direction of the aircraft that they are hoping to shoot down. It was specified in this meeting in September of 1940 that there had to be at least, these command towers, at least 300 metres away from the main tower, because the amount of smoke produced by the guns and the vibrations which would upset the observational instruments and later the radar systems that were on top of these towers, they had to be set apart from the towers. So there were 3 towers, they came as a twin set, and by October of 1940, so only 8-9 weeks after the very first bombing raid hits the capital during World War II, they start to break ground to build the first of the 3 twin sets of anti-aircraft towers, the Zoo Tower, known to the world, or the Berliners, as Gustav. Let's go down and I'll show you where that used to be. Right, so just down here in those trees, that's where the command tower was. And to get a sense of what was what, this is where the command tower was, over the Landwehr Canal that we've just been looking at. Right here would have been the huge anti-aircraft tower. Get a sense of what's what though. One of the classic images of the Zoo Tower was actually taken from Zoo Station. So what we really need is something that hasn't moved to give us a sense of what was where. And this bridge here are the train tracks just coming out of Zoo Station. So in a minute I'll go up there and I'll show you where it used to stand in relation to the tracks, which are still there. But up here was the actual tower itself, now reincorporated after the war as part of the zoo. Let's start at the end, because as you can see, these ones are both gone, and in a few minutes we'll be heading up to Humboldtine, where you've got a lot more of the northern tower in the French sector that still stands, and there we get a sense of how the towers were designed, the armaments that were on top of them, etc., etc. But in May of 1947, British sappers filled this one here with 12 tons of explosives, and that was the end of it. They blew it up. Some of that concrete was left, the rest of it was taken to the Rubble Mountains on the outskirts of West Berlin. But over here, the actual battle tower itself turned out to be a much harder nut to crack. If you look behind me here, you can see this flat space is actually the petting zoo. There's a couple of little ponies down there you might be able to see. And this flat area was created by the footprint of the battle tower. These were Mark I towers, so Friedrich Tams, with a bit of Hitler input, but also, of course, Fritz Todt and Albert Speer. They designed these Mark I towers to have a footprint which covered 70 metres by 70 metres by 39, sometimes you read 42 metres high, so pretty sizable. The command and control tower where we started, so 300 metres away on the other side of the canal, they were a little bit more slender. But both of the towers, of course, had to clear the tree line and the house line. This battle tower here for a 360-degree range of the guns, the most famous, or as Hitler would call it, the most beautiful gun ever fashioned, and that was, of course, the 128mm Flak, or anti-aircraft gun. Let's just get that out of the way, Flak. Now, these were Flaktürme in German, anti-aircraft towers. Flak made it into English, and it's an acronym, it's a shortened German word for Flugabwehrkanone, anti-aircraft gun, okay? So Flaktürme, the Flugabwehrkanone Türme, so anti-aircraft gun towers, that's where the name Flak comes from. But the command and control tower is a little bit more slender. that had a footprint of 50 by 50 by 25. Okay, so both of them would clear the tree line. This one here would be absolutely massive. After the end of the war, in May of 1947, the command and control tower was blown up by the Brits. They put 12 tons of explosives in it, and it went kaboom. This one would wait until later in the year, in the autumn of 1947, where they put 25 tons of TNT in. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the siren went up. Everyone had just had their bombed out windows re-glazed, so they had to open their windows to stop the pressure wave of the explosion blowing them out. And a big crowd gathered. They pressed the button and it just went kaboom. A couple of hours later, all the dust had settled and they realised that absolutely nothing had happened to it. Some American journalists reported in the crowd to have said to the occasional chuckle, I'm sure, made in Germany, after they realised that they'd failed. Eventually the Brits would create a company called Oxygen, who would use oxyacetylene torches and whatnot to cut through the reinforcing steel. They cut the whole thing into pieces, and apart from the few chunks of concrete of the command tower that we have already seen, it was all removed to the rubble mountains, the Devil's Mountain in the forest on the edge of West Berlin. But now, as you can see, it's all completely gone. The other two towers, Humboldthain and Friedrichshain, in the French and Russian sectors, they fared a little bit differently in the destructions after World War II. And that's where we're going to go now, to get more of a sense of how the towers designed, what kind of weaponry do they have on them, and the stories of inside and outside those towers. At the end of the war, when it was announced that Hitler was dead, it was erroneously, of course, the day after the event had actually taken place, that Hitler had died in the vicinity of the Zoo Flak Tower, you know, swathed in the German flag, fighting to the death. That was a total lie. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist, had suggested that the final command post for the Battle of Berlin, as the Russians invaded, and he himself and family, that they would see the last days of World War II out in the Zoo Flak Tower, because these things were absolutely monstrous and there was no conventional weapon. Even with a kind of a free range, just pounding it, there was nothing that was going to break the 3.8 metre thick reinforced concrete roof or the 2.5 metre thick reinforced concrete walls. These things were monstrous. And it was a result of that, of course, that some of Berlin's most famous treasures were kept in these anti-aircraft towers to protect them at the end of the war, only to be, shall we say, liberated from the barbarians, as the Russians would say, at the end of the war. So here in the Zoo Flak Tower was a famous treasure of Priam. Priam, those of you who are familiar with the story of Troy, the King of Troy's treasure, found by the famous archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann. Unfortunately, he got his dates wrong, and the treasure that he'd found, it's 8,600 pieces of gold, silver, and bronze, jewellery, bowls, all sorts of fantastic stuff, actually predated the date of the Trojan Wars by over 1,000 years, so he wasn't quite right there. Russians took that, that's still in Russia. Movable bits of the Pergamon altar from Berlin's famous Pergamon Museum were kept in here. Other stuff from other Berlin museums was stored in the others, and that's where we're going to go now. So follow me, let's head up to the north, and we'll go up to where the best preserved of the anti-aircraft towers still stands, and that is the Humboldthain Flak Tower, the northern Flak Tower in Humboldthain Park.